My name is Mark, and I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood just outside of Chicago. I work as an engineer for a mid-sized tech company, while my wife, Sarah, is a freelance graphic designer. We've been married for 10 years, and although we don't have children, we've built a comfortable life together. Our home is a modest two-story house on a tree-lined street, the kind where neighbors know each other, and kids play outside until dusk. It's a peaceful place, the kind of community where you'd never expect the kind of turmoil that was about to engulf my life. Sarah and I met in college. She was studying art, and I was deep into my engineering program. We connected over our love of movies and late-night discussions about our dreams and futures. Sarah's creativity and passion for life were what drew me to her. We got married right after graduation, and life seemed perfect. She started her freelance career from home, which allowed her flexibility, while I climbed the corporate ladder, working long hours to ensure we could enjoy the lifestyle we wanted. Our evenings were usually spent together, watching movies, cooking dinner, or just talking about our days. We took vacations twice a year, exploring new places and creating memories. Sarah was the light of my life, always there with a smile, always supportive, or so I thought. Our marriage had its ups and downs like any other, but we always managed to work through our issues, or so I believed. The cracks in our relationship were subtle, barely noticeable at first. But as time went on, they widened, and I began to feel a distance growing between us that I couldn't quite explain. The changes in Sarah's behavior were gradual, almost imperceptible at first. It started with the late-night work sessions. She'd always been dedicated to her freelance projects, but lately, she seemed to be spending more time than usual in her home office. She claimed she had taken on a few new clients, which required extra hours, and I didn't question it. I admired her work ethic and was happy to see her business thriving. However, other signs began to emerge. Sarah's phone, once casually left on the kitchen counter or the living room coffee table, was now always with her. She'd keep it face down and seemed to get more texts and notifications than usual. Whenever I asked who it was, she'd brush it off with a quick, "Just a client," or "It's nothing important." Her appearance also changed. Sarah had always been beautiful to me, but she seemed to be putting extra effort into her looks lately. She bought new clothes, spent more time on her hair and makeup, and even started going to the gym regularly. When I complimented her on how great she looked, she'd smile and say she just wanted to feel good about herself. Despite these changes, I pushed my suspicions aside, convincing myself that I was being paranoid. After all, we had been together for so long, and I trusted her completely. But the nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach wouldn't go away. One evening, while I was watching TV in the living room, Sarah came in, dressed up more than usual for a night out with her friends. She looked stunning in a little black dress and high heels, her makeup perfectly done. "You look amazing," I said, genuinely impressed. "Where are you heading tonight?" "Thanks, babe," she replied with a smile. "Just going out for drinks with the girls. We haven't caught up in a while." "Have fun," I said, kissing her on the cheek. "Say hi to everyone for me." As she left, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled over me. Something about her behavior felt off. She had been going out with her friends more frequently lately, and her excuses seemed rehearsed, like she was trying too hard to convince me. The tipping point came a few weeks later. It was a Saturday morning, and Sarah had gone to the gym as usual. I decided to clean up the house and do some laundry. While sorting through the clothes in the hamper, I found a receipt from a fancy restaurant tucked into one of Sarah's jeans pockets. It was dated from the previous Tuesday, a night when she had told me she was working late on a project. My heart sank. Why would she lie about working late and instead go out to an expensive restaurant? The pieces of the puzzle started to come together in my mind, and I couldn't ignore the signs any longer. My suspicions were no longer just baseless fears. They were grounded in reality. I knew I had to find out the truth, no matter how much it hurt. The trust I had in Sarah was crumbling, and I needed to understand what was really going on. The gnawing suspicions drove me to take action. I needed solid evidence, something undeniable. That Tuesday night had been the first clear sign, but it wasn't enough. I had to know for sure. One day, while Sarah was out, I decided to check her computer. She always kept it password protected, but I knew her well enough to guess her password. My heart pounded in my chest as I typed it in. When the desktop screen appeared, I felt a mix of relief and dread. I navigated to her email and social media accounts, looking for anything suspicious, but everything seemed normal at first glance. Then I found it, a series of emails from someone named A. They were carefully worded, nothing overtly incriminating, but the tone was too familiar, too intimate. My stomach churned as I read through them. It wasn't until I stumbled upon her hidden folder of photos that the full extent of her betrayal hit me. There were pictures of Sarah with a man I didn't recognize, taken in various places around town. They were always close, often touching, and in some, they were kissing. My hands shook as I looked through the photos, each one a dagger to my heart. Determined to get to the bottom of this, I decided to follow her the next time she went out. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. The following Saturday, she told me she was meeting her friends for brunch. As soon as she left, I grabbed my car keys and followed her at a safe distance. I tailed her to a hotel on the other side of town. She parked her car, and I watched as she walked into the lobby, her demeanor relaxed and confident. My blood boiled as I parked and hurried after her, keeping a safe distance. Inside, I saw her approach a man in the lobby. They embraced and kissed, confirming my worst fears. They headed to the elevator, and I knew I had to act quickly. I rushed to the front desk, feigning calm, and asked for a room key, claiming I was a guest who had lost his. With the keycard in hand, I took the next elevator up, my heart racing. I found their room and hesitated for a moment, steeling myself for what I was about to do. Then I swiped the keycard and burst into the room. The sight that greeted me was worse than I had imagined. Sarah and her lover were on the bed, caught in the act. The look of shock on Sarah's face when she saw me was quickly replaced by terror. "Mark!" she screamed, scrambling to cover herself. "What are you doing here?" I didn't answer. Rage blinded me as I turned my attention to the man beside her. He was frozen, eyes wide with fear. I grabbed him by the collar and threw him off the bed. He stumbled and fell, and I followed him, fists flying. Years of pent-up frustration and betrayal fueled my punches. The man barely had time to react. He tried to defend himself, but I was relentless. Blood splattered as my fists connected with his face, his cries of pain barely registering in my ears. "Mark, stop! You're going to kill him!" Sarah's voice broke through my fury, but it only fueled my anger. I paused, breathing heavily, looking at the man who was now a crumpled heap on the floor. His face was a bloody mess, and he whimpered in pain. I turned to Sarah, who was cowering on the bed, clutching the sheets to her chest. "How could you, Sarah?" I spat, my voice shaking with rage and hurt. "How could you do this to us? To me?" She was crying now, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry, Mark. I didn't mean for it to get this far. It was a mistake." "A mistake?" I laughed bitterly. "This wasn't a mistake, Sarah. This was a choice. Your choice." I looked at her one last time, then turned and left the room, slamming the door behind me. The sound echoed in the hallway, but it couldn't drown out the agony tearing through my chest. I walked away, each step heavy with the weight of betrayal, knowing that nothing would ever be the same again. The drive back home was a blur. My mind was a storm of emotions: anger, betrayal, sadness. The images of Sarah and that man kept replaying in my head, fueling my rage. By the time I got home, I was shaking with fury. I knew Sarah would follow soon, and I needed to confront her properly. I paced the living room, waiting. Each minute felt like an eternity. Finally, I heard her car pull up in the driveway. The front door opened, and there she was, looking disheveled and scared. Her eyes were red from crying, and she hesitated at the doorway, unsure of what to expect. "Mark, please," she started, her voice trembling. "Let's talk about this." "Talk?" I exploded. "Talk about what, Sarah? About how you've been screwing another man behind my back? About how you lied to me, to us, for God knows how long?" She flinched at my words, but I didn't care. I wanted her to feel a fraction of the pain I was feeling. "Mark, it wasn't like that," she pleaded, stepping towards me. "It was a mistake, a terrible mistake. I never meant to hurt you." "A mistake," I repeated, laughing bitterly. "That's what you keep saying. How many times, Sarah? How many times did you make this mistake?" Her silence was answer enough. I shook my head, disgusted. "I trusted you, Sarah. I thought we had something real. But clearly I was wrong." Tears streamed down her face, but I was too angry to care. Why, Sarah? Why did you do it? I was lonely, Mark, she admitted, her voice breaking. You were always at work and I felt so alone. It started as just someone to talk to and then it got out of hand. Out of hand? I shouted. You slept with him, Sarah! That's more than out of hand! That's betrayal! She sobbed, collapsing onto the couch. I know, Mark. I know. I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. The sight of her crying only fueled my anger. Sorry? You think sorry is going to fix this? Do you have any idea what you've done? You've destroyed everything we built together. Please, Mark, she begged, reaching out to me. We can work through this. We can go to counseling. We can… Counseling! I cut her off, my voice dripping with contempt. You think some therapy sessions are going to fix this? You think I can just forget what I saw today? I don't know, Mark, she whispered, defeated. I don't know what to do. I just don't want to lose you. You already lost me, Sarah, I said coldly. The moment you decided to betray our marriage, you lost me. She broke down completely, her sobs echoing through the room. Part of me felt a twinge of pity, but it was quickly overshadowed by my anger. I couldn't stay in the same room with her any longer. I need some air, I muttered, turning towards the door. I can't look at you right now. Mark, please don't go, she cried. But I ignored her, slamming the door behind me. I needed space, needed to think. I needed to figure out what to do next. My world had been turned upside down, and I didn't know how to right it again. I walked around the neighborhood, the cool evening air doing little to calm my rage. Neighbors were out, enjoying the last light of the day, unaware of the turmoil raging inside me. I kept walking, trying to process everything. The betrayal, the lies, the sheer audacity of it all. I had been a fool, blind to the signs, trusting someone who didn't deserve it. When I finally returned home, the house was quiet. Sarah was sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the wall. She looked up when I entered, her eyes red and swollen. Mark, she said softly, I know I've hurt you. I know I've broken your trust. But I love you. Please, let's try to work this out. Her words felt hollow, like a desperate attempt to cling to something that was already broken beyond repair. I need time, Sarah, I said, my voice tired. I need time to think, to process all of this. I can't make any decisions right now. She nodded, tears streaming down her face again. I understand. Take all the time you need. Just please don't shut me out completely. I didn't answer. I just walked past her, heading to the guest room where I could be alone with my thoughts. As I closed the door behind me, I felt a strange sense of finality. Our marriage, our life together, it all seemed like a distant memory, something that had been shattered and could never be put back together. The days that followed were a blur of anger and cold silence. I moved into the guest room, avoiding Sarah as much as possible. Every time I saw her, the images of her and her lover flashed in my mind, reigniting my fury. But as the anger simmered, I began to think about what to do next. The thought of revenge slowly took hold, feeding off my bitterness and betrayal. Sarah's attempts at reconciliation only fueled my resolve. She'd leave notes and texts, begging for another chance, promising she'd change. But I knew better. Her betrayal was unforgivable, and I needed her to understand the depth of the pain she'd caused. And her lover. He wasn't going to get away with this either. One evening, after a particularly tense encounter where Sarah tried to talk to me about therapy, I decided it was time to act. I had a friend, Paul, who was a private investigator. We'd known each other since college, and I trusted him implicitly. If anyone could help me gather the evidence I needed to ruin her lover's life, it was Paul. I met Paul at a quiet bar downtown, away from prying eyes and ears. He listened patiently as I recounted everything, his expression growing darker with each detail. Mark, I'm sorry you're going through this, he said, a hint of anger in his voice. But if you want to hit this guy where it hurts, I can help you. Thanks, Paul, I replied, grateful for his support. I want to make sure he regrets ever crossing me. Paul nodded. I'll dig up everything I can on him. Let's make sure he doesn't get away with this. Over the next few days, Paul worked tirelessly. He found out that Sarah's lover, whose name was Eric, was married with 2 kids and worked as a manager at a local bank. Armed with this information, I knew exactly how to strike. The first step was to expose Eric's infidelity to his wife. I compiled all the evidence Paul had gathered. photos, emails, texts, into a neat package and mailed it anonymously to Eric's wife. I could only imagine the chaos it would cause in his life, mirroring the devastation he had brought into mine. Next, I decided to hit him professionally. Paul discovered that Eric had been embezzling money from the bank, a secret he'd kept well hidden. With Paul's help, I anonymously tipped off the bank's internal auditors, providing them with enough evidence to launch a full-scale investigation. As the days passed, I could see the effects of my actions. Sarah was still trying to mend things between us, but she had no idea of the storm I had unleashed on Eric. Then one evening, she received a phone call. I watched from the hallway as she answered, her face turning pale as she listened. "Eric, what do you mean they know? How could they have found out?" she stammered, panic rising in her voice. "No, I don't know who could have done this. You have to fix it." She hung up, her hands shaking. When she saw me standing there, a mix of guilt and fear flashed across her face. "Mark, please, you have to help me," she pleaded. "Eric is in serious trouble. They're saying he might lose his job, and his wife found out about us. It's a nightmare." I stared at her, feeling a twisted sense of satisfaction. "Why would I help you, Sarah? You brought this on yourself." She looked at me, tears welling up in her eyes. "I know I messed up, but this is destroying lives. Please, Mark, I'm begging you." "Maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to cheat," I said coldly. "You and Eric deserve everything that's coming to you." She broke down, collapsing onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. I felt no pity for her. Her tears couldn't wash away the betrayal, couldn't erase the pain she had caused. The next day, I received a call from Paul. "It's done, Mark," he said. "Eric's been suspended from his job pending an investigation, and his wife has filed for divorce. He's in a world of trouble." "Thanks, Paul," I replied, a grim satisfaction settling over me. "I appreciate everything you've done. Just take care of yourself, Mark. Don't let this consume you." "I'll try," I said, hanging up the phone. I knew Paul was right, but the sense of justice I felt was overwhelming. Sarah's attempts to reach out to me dwindled after that. She knew the extent of my anger, and the distance between us grew wider. I focused on my work, my life, trying to find some semblance of normalcy amidst the chaos. But the damage was done. Our marriage was shattered, and the revenge I had sought had only provided temporary relief. As I sat in the empty house, I realized that I needed to move forward, to rebuild my life without Sarah. The path ahead was uncertain, but it was the only way to heal from the betrayal that had nearly destroyed me. Days turned into weeks, and the tension in the house was unbearable. Sarah and I lived like strangers, the silence between us filled with unspoken words and unresolved pain. My anger had settled into a cold resolve. I knew what I had to do. The time had come to confront Sarah one last time and make the decision that had been looming over us since the day I discovered her betrayal. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, I returned home to find Sarah sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the TV. She looked up when I entered, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and resignation. She knew what was coming. "Sarah," I said, my voice steady, "we need to talk." She nodded silently, her face pale. I sat down across from her, taking a deep breath to steady myself. The weight of the conversation ahead pressed heavily on my chest. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened," I began. "About your affair, about the lies, and about what that means for us." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she said nothing, waiting for me to continue. "I can't forgive you, Sarah. I can't forget what you did," I said, my voice firm. "And I can't continue living like this, pretending that things can go back to the way they were. They can't." She started to speak, but I held up my hand to stop her. "Please, let me finish." She nodded again, tears streaming down her face. "I've decided to file for divorce," I said, the words heavy but necessary. "This marriage is over, and we both need to move on." "Mark, please," she sobbed, her voice breaking. "I know I hurt you. I know I made terrible mistakes, but I still love you. Can't we try to fix this? Can't we at least try counseling?" I shook my head, feeling a mix of sorrow and relief. "No, Sarah, it's too late for that. The trust is gone, and without trust, there's nothing left to build on. I need to think about my future, about my own happiness, and I can't find that with you anymore." She broke down completely, her body shaking with sobs. "I don't want to lose you, Mark. I don't want to lose everything we had." "I don't want to lose you either," I admitted, my voice softening. "But I already have. You made sure of that when you chose to betray me. This isn't just about what you did. It's about the person you've become, and the person I've become because of it." Sarah looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. "Is there really no hope? No chance at all?" I sighed, feeling the weight of her words. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I wish things were different, but they're not. We both deserve a chance to start over, to find happiness on our own terms." The room was silent except for her quiet sobs. I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief, knowing that this painful chapter of my life was coming to an end. "I'll contact a lawyer tomorrow," I said, standing up. "We'll work out the details of the divorce, and we'll make sure it's as smooth as possible." Sarah nodded weakly, unable to speak. I walked to the door, pausing for a moment before turning back to her. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Sarah. I really do." With that, I left the room, feeling a sense of finality wash over me. The decision to divorce was painful, but it was the only way forward. I needed to reclaim my life, to heal from the wounds of betrayal, and to find a new path. The next morning, I contacted my lawyer and began the process of filing for divorce. Sarah and I communicated through our lawyers, keeping our interactions to a minimum. It was a difficult time, but I knew it was necessary. The pain of the past was still fresh, but I was determined to move forward, to rebuild my life from the ashes of what had been. As the days passed, the weight of the decision began to lift. I found solace in my work, in the support of friends and family, and in the knowledge that I was taking control of my future. The path ahead was uncertain, but it was mine to navigate. The divorce process was long and emotionally draining, but I stayed focused on the end goal: freedom from the pain and betrayal that had defined my life for too long. Sarah and I eventually reached a settlement, dividing our assets and moving forward separately. In the quiet moments, I reflected on what I had learned from this experience. Trust, once broken, is difficult to rebuild. Love, while powerful, cannot overcome all obstacles. And sometimes the best way to heal is to let go and start anew. The last conversation with Sarah marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. It was a painful but necessary step towards reclaiming my life and finding happiness on my own terms. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was ready to face it, one step at a time. The divorce process was grueling. Sarah and I communicated only through our lawyers, and every conversation felt like a battle. Emotions ran high, and the legalities only added to the tension. Despite our best efforts to remain civil, there were moments when the bitterness and anger broke through. Our first court appearance was scheduled for a chilly morning in early November. I arrived at the courthouse feeling a mix of dread and determination. This was the final step in ending our marriage, and I needed it to go smoothly. Paul, my lawyer, met me outside the courtroom. He was a calm, reassuring presence in the storm of my emotions. "Ready?" he asked, giving me a supportive nod. "Ready as I'll ever be," I replied, taking a deep breath. We entered the courtroom, and I saw Sarah already seated with her lawyer. She looked tired and fragile, a stark contrast to the confident woman I had known. For a moment, a pang of sadness pierced my heart. But I quickly reminded myself of why we were here. The judge, a stern-looking woman with piercing eyes, called the session to order. Our lawyers presented our cases, discussing the division of assets, spousal support, and other financial matters. It was a clinical dissection of our life together, each detail laid bare for examination. Paul was thorough and relentless, ensuring that my interests were protected. Sarah's lawyer argued for more favorable terms for her, citing her emotional distress and her need for financial support. The back and forth was intense, but I trusted Paul to handle it. Finally, it was my turn to speak. I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest, and addressed the judge. "Your Honor," I began, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. "I loved Sarah deeply, and I believed in our marriage. But her betrayal has left me with no other choice but to seek a divorce. I ask that you consider the pain and suffering I've endured when making your decision." The judge listened intently, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she turned to Sarah. "Mrs. Thompson, do you have anything to say?" Sarah stood up, her eyes filled with tears. Your Honor, I made terrible mistakes. I hurt Mark in ways I can never fully express my regret for. But I still care about him, and I want us both to find some measure of peace. I accept that our marriage is over, but I ask for fair consideration in the settlement. The judge nodded, taking notes before calling a recess. Paul and I stepped outside to wait for the judge's decision. The tension was palpable, and I paced the hallway, unable to sit still. You're doing great, Mark, Paul said, trying to reassure me. Whatever happens, we'll handle it. After what felt like an eternity, we were called back into the courtroom. The judge took her seat and addressed us. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, she began, her tone measured. Divorce is never easy, and the circumstances of your case are particularly painful. I have considered the evidence and testimonies presented, and I have reached a decision. She went on to outline the terms of the settlement. Sarah would receive spousal support for a limited time, but the majority of our assets would be divided equally. The house would be sold, and the proceeds split between us. It was a fair decision given the circumstances, but it still felt like a loss. As the judge concluded, she offered a few words of advice. I hope both of you can find a way to heal and move forward. This process marks the end of one chapter, but also the beginning of another. Take this opportunity to rebuild your lives with the lessons you've learned. With that, the session was adjourned. Sarah and I left the courtroom, our lawyers handling the final paperwork. We stood outside, the cold air biting at our faces, and for a moment, we were just two people who had once loved each other. Goodbye, Sarah, I said softly, the finality of the word hanging in the air. Goodbye, Mark, she replied, her voice filled with sorrow. I hope you find happiness. I nodded, turning to walk away. As I left the courthouse, a sense of relief washed over me. The trial was over, and the divorce was finalized. It was time to focus on the future, on healing and rebuilding my life. The days following the trial were a mix of relief and sadness. I moved out of our house and into a new apartment, a fresh start in a place untainted by memories of betrayal. It was a small but comfortable space, and I took my time decorating it, making it my own. I threw myself into my work, finding solace in the routine and the sense of accomplishment it brought. My colleagues, who knew nothing of my personal struggles, were a source of distraction and normalcy. I began to reconnect with old friends, rebuilding the social connections I had neglected during my marriage. One evening, as I sat on the balcony of my new apartment, watching the sun set over the city, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. The future was uncertain, but it was mine to shape. The pain of betrayal still lingered, but it was slowly being overshadowed by a sense of hope and possibility. The trial had marked the end of a painful chapter in my life, but it was also the beginning of a new journey. It was time to move forward, to find happiness and fulfillment on my own terms. And as I looked out at the horizon, I knew that I was ready to face whatever came next. As the months passed, I began to embrace my new life. The divorce, while painful, had been a necessary step toward healing and self-discovery. I poured my energy into work and personal growth, seeking to rebuild the parts of myself that had been broken. My new apartment became a sanctuary, a place where I could reflect and recharge. I took up hobbies that I had long neglected: photography, cooking, and even painting. These activities provided a creative outlet and helped me reconnect with passions I had forgotten. My evenings were no longer filled with tension and arguments, but with quiet moments of peace and contentment. I also started attending therapy sessions with Dr. Ellis, a compassionate and insightful therapist who guided me through the complex emotions of betrayal and loss. Dr. Ellis helped me unpack the pain and anger, encouraging me to understand the deeper issues that had plagued my marriage. Mark, she said during one session, healing isn't just about moving on from the past. It's about learning from it and growing stronger. You have the opportunity to redefine your life and your happiness. Her words resonated with me, and I committed myself to the journey of self-improvement. I read books on personal development, practiced mindfulness, and surrounded myself with positive influences. Slowly but surely, I felt the weight of the past lifting, replaced by a sense of purpose and optimism. My social life also began to flourish. I reconnected with old friends and made new ones, expanding my support network. Paul, who had been instrumental during the divorce, became a close confidant. We often met for drinks or dinner, discussing everything from work to life plans. "You're doing great, Mark," Paul said one evening over beers. "It's good to see you smiling again." "Thanks, Paul," I replied, genuinely grateful. "I feel like I'm finally starting to find myself again." The turning point came when I decided to take a solo trip to the mountains, a place I had always wanted to visit but never had the chance. The crisp air, the breathtaking views, and the solitude provided a perfect backdrop for introspection. Hiking through the trails, I felt a sense of freedom and clarity that had eluded me for so long. One afternoon, as I sat on a rock overlooking a serene lake, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the trial, all of it had been a crucible, forging me into a stronger, wiser person. I realized that while Sarah's betrayal had shattered my world, it had also given me the opportunity to rebuild it on my own terms. Returning from the trip, I felt invigorated and ready to embrace the next chapter of my life. I continued to focus on my career, taking on new projects and challenges that pushed me out of my comfort zone. My efforts paid off, and I received a promotion, a testament to my hard work and dedication. One evening, while attending a networking event for work, I met Emily. She was a marketing consultant, intelligent, funny, and incredibly kind. We struck up a conversation that flowed effortlessly, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a genuine connection. Over the next few weeks, Emily and I started seeing each other regularly. Our relationship developed slowly, built on trust and mutual respect. She knew about my past and the pain I had endured, and she offered unwavering support and understanding. "Mark, you've been through so much," Emily said one evening as we walked through the park. "But you've come out stronger. I admire your resilience." "Thanks, Emily," I replied, feeling a warmth I hadn't experienced in a long time. "You've helped me see that there can be a bright future after so much darkness." Our relationship blossomed, and I found myself opening up to the possibility of love again. Emily's presence in my life was a reminder that happiness was not only possible but within reach. We shared laughter, adventures, and quiet moments of intimacy that healed the wounds of the past. As the anniversary of the divorce approached, I reflected on how far I had come. The pain and betrayal that once consumed me had given way to hope and renewal. I had rebuilt my life, surrounded by people who cared about me and supported my journey. One evening, sitting on the balcony of my apartment with Emily by my side, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. The city lights twinkled below, a testament to the endless possibilities that lay ahead. "Mark," Emily said, taking my hand, "I'm so glad we found each other. You've brought so much joy into my life." "And you into mine," I replied, squeezing her hand. "Here's to new beginnings and a future filled with happiness." Looking out at the horizon, I knew that the road to recovery had been long and arduous, but it had led me to a place of peace and fulfillment. The betrayal that once threatened to destroy me had instead become the catalyst for a new, brighter chapter in my life. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to embrace whatever came next, confident in my strength and the support of those who loved me. The past was a part of me, but it no longer defined me. I was free to create a future filled with hope, love, and endless possibilities.